The late afternoon sun filtered through the trees as mourners gathered around the freshly dug grave. The air was still, heavy with sorrow, and not a single voice rose above a whisper. The funeral of Daniel, a 40-year-old man who had passed suddenly just days ago, was quiet, respectful, exactly as his family had requested. Friends stood in neat rows, eyes lowered, some clutching tissues, others holding back tears. The wooden coffin, sealed and placed above the grave, bore a small bouquet of white lilies. A priest stood nearby, offering soft prayers. Nothing felt unusual until the silence was broken, not by a sound, but by a movement. A few people at the front stiffened. There, slowly crawling across the polished lid of the coffin, was a spider. Not a small one, a giant spider. Its legs moved with eerie grace, steady and slow, as it made its way toward the center of the coffin. At first, people assumed it was a coincidence, a disturbing but meaningless appearance. Someone even stepped forward, thinking to brush it away. But then it stopped, right in the middle, and it didn't move again. Everyone froze. The priest paused mid-sentence. The spider just sat there, unmoving, as if it had been waiting for something. What was even stranger, no one could figure out where it had come from. It hadn't dropped from a tree. It hadn't crawled from the ground. It was just suddenly there. An older woman gasped. Another whispered a prayer under her breath. The atmosphere shifted, and then something even more disturbing happened. The spider lifted its front legs and tapped the coffin. Twice. Light, deliberate taps. And that was the moment when everyone realized this wasn't just an insect. It was a sign, a warning, or something worse. The sun had slipped lower by now, casting long, deep shadows across the cemetery grounds. The air felt cooler, heavier, as if the wind itself had become hesitant. No one moved. The spider remained perched atop the coffin, its stillness far more terrifying than if it had crawled away. It hadn't come there by chance. That much was now clear. Daniel's sister, Maria, stepped forward cautiously, her hand trembling. "Don't touch it," someone whispered behind her. She stopped. The priest, visibly rattled, tried to regain control of the ceremony. "Let us continue," he said softly, but his voice lacked conviction. The tension in the air was unshakable. No one was listening anymore. Every eye was locked on the spider. Then out of nowhere, it moved again. Slow, calculated steps. It began to circle the center of the coffin in a precise pattern, tracing something that looked disturbingly deliberate. It wasn't erratic. It wasn't mindless. It was purposeful. And when it stopped, it sat, again, in the exact spot it had started. A strange humming sound passed through the crowd. Not from a speaker. Not from anyone's phone. It was low, vibrating through the ground. Some thought it was their imagination, until the earth around the grave let out a soft, muffled crack. Just a hairline break in the soil near the foot of the coffin. Everyone stepped back. Maria clutched her mouth with both hands. "It's a sign," she whispered. "It's him." "What are you saying?" someone asked, trying to hold on to logic. "He hated spiders," she said shakily. "He was terrified of them. Always was. We used to tease him about it. He used to say, if one ever came near him, he'd take it as a warning from the other side." The crowd murmured. Some laughed nervously, hoping to make light of it. But no one could look away. The priest tried again to resume the prayer, but this time, the microphone popped with static and died. The speaker shut off completely. Then the spider rose onto its legs once more. This time, it tapped the coffin 3 times. 1, 2, 3, and the earth around the grave shifted again. Just slightly, but enough for several people to see it clearly. It was happening in real time. Something below the surface was moving. Not the spider, not the ground, but inside the coffin. Maria screamed. 2 men rushed to hold her back as she lunged toward it, sobbing, confused, terrified. "Let him out. Please, let him out." One of the funeral staff tried to intervene, but even he looked pale. He had seen 100 burials, but never one like this. Suddenly, the spider skittered forward, fast, mechanical, intentional, and positioned itself directly over where Daniel's heart would be, and stopped. The air was silent, Everyone waited, until the soft, unmistakable sound of wood creaking came from inside the coffin. And then they heard it. 3 knocks. From the inside. Gasps filled the air. A woman fainted near the second row of chairs. Others backed away quickly, their hands over their mouths, unable to believe what they had just heard. But it hadn't been imagined. The knock, 3 distinct thuds from within the coffin, was real. Too clear, too heavy, and far too deliberate. The priest dropped his prayer book. His lips moved silently, but no words came out. Maria broke free from the arms holding her and fell to her knees beside the coffin, tears pouring down her face. "Daniel! Daniel, are you alive?" Her voice was raw, desperate, but full of something that hadn't existed in the last few days. Hope. "Open it!" she screamed. "Please! Someone open it!" The funeral staff stood frozen. No one had ever trained them for this. This was no accident, no glitch, no buried alive horror story. Daniel had been declared dead by multiple doctors, no heartbeat, no brain activity. The body had been prepared, sealed, but now the impossible was happening. Jason, a cousin who had remained silent through most of the ceremony, stepped forward. "Get the tools, we're opening it." "But what if—" a man began. "I said, get the tools," Jason shouted. 2 workers scrambled to the van and returned with crowbars and gloves. The spider, still unmoving, remained perfectly centered over Daniel's chest, like it was guarding something or someone. As the men worked to unseal the coffin, the air grew thicker. The smell of soil mixed with something else, something sweet and faintly rotten, like wilting flowers left in a locked room. The silence was broken only by the sound of metal scraping wood. Maria whispered a prayer as the final nails were pulled free. One worker hesitated, then slowly lifted the lid, and that's when everyone stepped back. Daniel lay as expected, but his face wasn't peaceful. It was strained, like he had been screaming before death, or maybe after. His eyes were shut, but his brow was furrowed, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. But the worst part wasn't his expression, it was what was on his chest. The spider, still sitting there, still unmoved. Jason leaned closer. "Is he breathing?" he whispered. A worker checked. "No, no pulse, no signs of life." Then the spider moved. It walked calmly down Daniel's chest and onto the edge of the coffin. It turned to face Maria, just for a moment, and then, without warning, jumped off and scurried into the dirt. Gone. No one followed it. No one dared. And then Daniel's hand twitched, only once. Fingers curling slightly like something inside was trying to move, trying to reach out. But not quite. Human. Jason shouted, "He moved! He moved!" But when the doctor arrived moments later, the hand was still, rigid, cold, no heartbeat, no breath, dead. Again. But now everyone around that grave understood something. Daniel hadn't just died. He had come back. And whatever brought him back was not finished yet. Panic had quietly replaced mourning. Most of the guests had stepped far back, some walking swiftly toward their cars, refusing to look back. Others stayed frozen, unsure if they had witnessed a miracle or something much darker. Jason stood guard near the coffin, his fist clenched. "I know what I saw," he said to the paramedic quietly. His hand moved, and that thing, whatever that spider was, it didn't just appear by accident. Maria sat nearby, trembling. Her eyes locked on Daniel's face, searching for any sign of him still being there. "He was trying to come back," she whispered. "I know he was." The medical team tried to reassure the remaining family that everything had been handled properly, that the body would be re-examined, that maybe a rare muscle contraction had caused the movement, but no explanation could account for the spider or the knocking. As the sun finally dipped beneath the horizon, cemetery lights flickered on one by one, casting cold halos over the gravestones. The workers were instructed to delay burial until morning. Jason didn't want to leave. He kept staring at the now open coffin, half expecting the spider to return. But it didn't. Instead, something else happened. At exactly 7:07 p.m., Daniel's phone, long thought to have been buried with him, started ringing, loudly. The ringtone echoed from inside the coffin. Jason nearly fell back. One of the paramedics, shaken but curious, stepped forward and reached under Daniel's shoulder. A phone, cold and completely intact, slid from beneath the lining. The screen was on. Unknown caller, no number, just that. Jason answered it with trembling hands. "Hello?" he whispered. At first only static. Then, a whisper. So faint it was hard to tell if it was real. "Don't bury me." Jason's face went pale. He put the phone on speaker, holding it out for everyone to hear. Again, static. Then another whisper. "They sent it. It knows me. It marked me." The phone screen glitched, turned black, then powered off completely. The paramedic stepped away, saying nothing. He simply walked off toward his vehicle, locked the doors, and sat there in silence. Jason stared down at the now dark phone, barely breathing. "It's him," he said quietly. "It's Daniel. He's still in there. Somewhere." Maria didn't say a word. She slowly walked back to the coffin, looked at her brother's face, and whispered, "I told you." He hated spiders. And then she looked around, at the trees, at the shadows, and said something no one expected. "Whatever came with that spider isn't done yet." Night had fully set in now. The cemetery, once gently lit by sunlight, was blanketed in eerie silence. Security had arrived at the scene, but even they moved cautiously, as if the air itself had turned hostile. The coffin remained open, untouched, and Daniel's body lay as it had, still, cold, and yet somehow charged with something none of them could name. Jason, still clutching the phone, sat nearby. He kept replaying the words over and over in his head. "Don't bury me. They sent it. It marked me." He didn't understand, but something inside him told him this wasn't about resurrection or fear of death. This was about possession. Maria hadn't spoken in almost 10 minutes. She sat quietly with her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the patch of dirt where the spider had vanished. And then, without moving her head, she said softly, "He told me about the dream." Jason looked up. "What dream?" "A week before he died," she continued. "He told me he'd been seeing a spider in his sleep. The same one, every night, sitting on his chest. He said it didn't bite, didn't move, just stared at him, like it was waiting." Jason's stomach turned. Why didn't he tell anyone else? He thought it was stress. He laughed about it, said it felt real, but it was probably nothing. But then, the last night, he said it spoke. Jason's eyes widened. "Spoke?" Maria nodded slowly. "It told him he was chosen." Chosen for what? She didn't know. Suddenly, a deep mechanical hum began to vibrate through the ground. Not loud, but constant and familiar. It was the same frequency they had heard from the coffin when the spider first tapped. Jason stood up, alert. "Do you hear that?" Everyone did. It was undeniable. Then one of the floodlights flickered. Another cut out, then another. Within seconds, the entire row of cemetery lights went black, one by one, until the entire area was swallowed in darkness. And in that silence, someone screamed. A deep, guttural cry came from the edge of the trees. A security guard's flashlight dropped, rolling onto the path, revealing just for a moment dozens of legs. Spiders, not one, not two, but a wave, thousands, all moving in one direction, toward the open coffin. Jason grabbed Maria's hand and pulled her back. The crowd began scattering, people tripping over gravestones, others calling for help. But it was too late. The spiders were fast, pouring in from the forest like a living shadow. And then they stopped, forming a perfect circle around Daniel's coffin. Motionless, silent, as if waiting. And from deep within the forest, a shape began to emerge. Not an animal, not human. Something tall, something that moved like silk across stone. And the spiders, as if sensing its presence, began tapping the ground. Soft, synchronized. Jason knew then. Daniel hadn't been marked by death. He'd been claimed. The shape stepped forward, slow, smooth, and soundless. No one could see its full form through the thick dark, but the way the air shifted around it made it clear. This thing wasn't from here. Its presence was unnatural, like the earth itself was holding its breath. The spiders remained still, surrounding the coffin in a perfect, unmoving ring. Not one made a sound. Not one twitched. They were waiting. Jason shielded Maria behind him, both staring into the dark. "What is that?" he whispered. The figure finally stopped just beyond the edge of the light, only a sliver of it visible. A silhouette, long and jagged. The space around it shimmered, like heat waves rising off stone. And then, the coffin lid moved. Not from the wind, from inside. Daniel's fingers wrapped around the coffin's edge. Slowly, shakily, his head lifted. His eyes opened, but they weren't his. They were darker, deeper, like something ancient looked out through them. Gasps echoed all around. Maria broke down in tears. "Daniel!" He turned his head toward her, but didn't blink, didn't speak. And then the figure in the dark stepped forward again. It didn't attack. It didn't growl. It simply stopped beside Daniel's body and knelt. The spiders responded immediately, crawling up the sides of the coffin, covering Daniel's body like a second skin, not biting, just wrapping, encasing, protecting. As the last spider climbed onto his face, Jason stepped forward, yelling, "Stop! He's still in there! You can't take him!" Daniel blinked once and spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was layered, echoed, hollow. "He belongs to us now." Then in a flash, the spiders pulled him down, into the coffin. The lid slammed shut with a thunderous crack, as if forced by 100 hands at once. The ground shook, and then silence. When the lights flickered back on, the forest was empty. The spiders were gone. The figure had vanished. The people were stunned, pale, whispering prayers under their breath. Jason stared at the coffin, now sealed tight once again. Only one thing had changed. Burned into the lid, scorched into the wood, was a mark. 8 legs, circular shape, a spider. But not just any spider. A seal, a warning, a promise. No one dared touch it again. The burial never resumed. The body was never moved. The grave remained there, unmarked, unwatched, but never silent. Because some nights, long after everyone's gone, cemetery staff report tapping sounds from under the soil. Software slow, always in threes.
Subscribe and press the bell icon so that you never miss the amazing video.